Hello everybody. So today we'd like to discuss Bloomberg Radio and its current markets, and we'd like to learn a little bit about the characteristics of those markets which might have contributed to its success so far. So first of all, despite what some might consider a decline of radio, it is still a very powerful medium. It reaches more than 92% of adults weekly, and New York and Boston specifically are ranked number one and number 10 best radio markets by Arbitron. So already Bloomberg has a very strong foothold in two very successful markets.
The program analysis we performed covered Bloomberg Radio, its direct and indirect competitors within the Boston and New York market. First, Bloomberg Radio primary audience are individuals between the ages of 25 and 54. Also, if we take all this into consideration, we came out to the conclusion that the competitive advantage Bloomberg Radio relies on the uniqueness of its content and the brand recognition. Its radio shows are performed and presented by Bloomberg producers and anchors. Also, due to the range of business Bloomberg covers and the factor that they own the radio station, they're more capable of providing a broader range of business news. Now, moving to the competition, we found out there's two direct competitors in Boston and none in New York. These two competitors focus on mainstream national talk shows, and both of them stream Bloomberg Radio. For the indirect competition, we found there's 4 in Boston and 11 in New York, which won its FM station.
Bloomberg uses AM radio in both Boston and New York markets. Compared to the FM radio, AM is cheaper and can be transmitted over longer distance. As you can see from the graph, Bloomberg's New York station can cover the most of the New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania metro, and the coverage area can reach 16,000 square miles. Since AM broadcast is susceptible to static disruption, Bloomberg built their radio station near the downtown of the city. In doing so, it can also broadcast to a larger majority of the wealthier listeners during their commute to and from the city. It is a capability that their competitors do not have.
So in order for us to determine the success factors for Bloomberg, we have to compare the two markets that they're currently in. So we're looking at New York and Boston, and we see that the biggest difference is that New York has a prominent focus on finance industry, and we're looking at Boston having a prominent focus on higher education. But other than that difference, the similarities match up with the current audience of Bloomberg. We're looking at about 9% of the population being employed in finance, looking at 39% of the population being 55 and over, about 15% of the population earning over $150,000, and just over 1.5 average vehicle per household.
Natalie did a great job of showing just how similar Boston and New York markets are. And when you take into consideration those demographics with the demographics of Bloomberg's current consumers, as well as the psychographic factors important, they're very well aligned in terms of being good markets for the product. So on the right, you can see the consumer groups we've chosen to be representative of these markets in these cities.
So we've established that the target markets we're looking at are affluent people. Next thing that we did is to find out the commute types of these target segments. We compared the home value heat map with commute times, and what we see was not surprising. That in fact, people who live in wealthier areas have longer commute times, from 20 to 40 minutes to work. Some interesting facts that we found out helped us to show that a lot of people in these two cities commute alone, and the majority of them actually listen to AM and FM radio. These facts actually helped us show how radio is in fact still a very good medium to reach people. Our next step was to find out what these people actually listen to. A study by Arbitron showed us that news and talk radios are the top formats in these two cities. And as Victor already talked about, there's not too much competition, so it's safe to say that Bloomberg is one of the top radio stations. To conclude, we can clearly see how each of the factors that my teammates talked about build up to one another to show the reasons for success for Bloomberg Radio in both Boston and New York. First of all, these two cities have the psychographic and demographics of people who are looking to find the information that Bloomberg programming provides. The programming itself is of excellent quality, and so as a result, it does not have too much competition. And finally, as I just explained, the affluent people generally have longer commute times, and they spend majority of time getting their financial information from radio stations such as Bloomberg. And this is why we believe Bloomberg Radio has been successful in both Boston and New York. Thank you.
Maybe the most important trait for today's business entrepreneurs and executives is the ability to multitask. They need the ability to focus on their own business while realizing everything that's going on in the business and financial markets around them. With that, Bloomberg is exactly the tool, being the most trusted business and financial instrument or news forum around. So we believe that they can definitely fulfill this need for the target market that we're going to go over. I'm Peter. We also have Jeff, Eddie, Remy, and Ahmad up here, and some of the different topics we're going to cover today, some industry trends and drivers, some market analysis, program and listenership analysis, some important thing about commuting times, and then we're going to conclude with our most important thoughts.
So as Peter said, we're going to start with our industry trends and drivers. Over the next 5 years, the industry is supposed to increase by 5%. Three key drivers are advertising expenditures, consumer expenditures, as well as number of cars and miles driven. Now, the next two are very much so positives. The internet radio usage is supposed to increase by 40% annually. Internet in cars is a new advent. It's supposed to increase as well. And as something that's seen as a positive as well as a negative, the regulation of cell phone usage. So as a negative part of that is if you can't use your cell phone, you can't access the internet. But if you can't use your cell phone, you also are more apt to listen to the radio.
So as Bloomberg Radio, we need to focus in three target markets. The first one is the American royalty. Our secondary market is the young city solos. By having these two markets, we have today's and tomorrow's business leaders, executives, investors, and business owners. We should also focus on the kids in Cabernet because it is just a natural fit if we focus on these first two segments. They share the American royalty's financial security, and they share the drive and the success of the young city solos. And as a group, they share time constraint, which Peter mentioned before. When performing our market analysis, we identified three main forces that have a major impact in this business. We have the substitutes, which we consider any other source of information where our listeners may go to instead of listening to Bloomberg Radio. We obviously need to consider our listeners and how to expand and how to better approach them with more quality in our program, but also reaching them with accurate, significant advertisements that would motivate their purchasing, because that is what our advertisers are looking for, and at the end of the day, that's where we're getting our revenue.
So looking a little into the programming and listenership analysis, obviously New York, #1 radio market in the country, most amount of people. Boston, number 10. They have some all-news stations in New York that covers a range of local news as well as national news and international news. And then Boston actually does not have any all-news talk stations. They have no all-news stations. They have news talk information stations, where the form is a little different. There's a little more interaction, callers, and a little more opinion-based rather than just news. You can see a few of the different stations with the rankings up there. And then again, like I sort of just covered, some of the program content, business, education, finance, up-to-date news coverage. And then in both the markets, there's a large amount of paid programming on the weekend that covers real estate, finance, and wealth management.
In the two pictures, the red line shows the area where the signal is strong and consistent. As you go away from the red line, the signal becomes weak and inconsistent.
So our commuting time analysis revealed some interesting information. According to Arbitron, the average commuting time is approximately half an hour for both of these markets. But when you look at the heat maps for both markets, you see that there's a distribution for commuters by car and then also commuters by public transportation. Our primary focus is going to be on the commuters by car, and as you can see even here in the heat map, this is without traffic. So you can expect to double those averages on a given day, especially during rush hour. So in conclusion, what we've told you today is basically that multitasking is a very important characteristic for our target consumer here. They are affluent, they're status-seeking people, and looking ahead with the growth of the radio industry, especially on the media of, or in the media of XM radio and internet radio. This is a media that we're actually going to need to cater to the needs of these individuals who really don't have the time to do everything that they need to do and do everything that they want to do. So how are we going to increase Bloomberg's listenership? Well, we need to improve the quality. We need to improve the quality of the content, and we also need to improve the geographic specificity of this content. And incentivizing the listenership is also very important because these people want to be engaged, or they even want to be influential. So across all of the platforms, all of the Bloomberg platforms, XM radio, internet radio, through the app, the key thing here, the most important feature is that we need to be the most trusted source for business and financial news out there. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. We are Team 6, and we're here to talk to you about Bloomberg Radio's current markets. Here's our lineup for today, a few key areas we're going to touch on throughout our presentation. So let's start with the market analysis. Now, if we look to our left, we see that New York and Boston is considered a top metro area in the country. On top of that, if we look to our right, they're in the top 10th percentile of the radio metro areas. In these areas, over 25 million people live. And in those 25 million people, a huge part are ideal Bloomberg Radio listeners. So what's Bloomberg Radio telling us? They're the world leader in business news. Now, who needs this business news? The power elite. Power elite as a whole group, make up a large portion of these 25 million. They're from the ages of 24 to 64. So now what's that? They're all in different stages of their career. And on top of that, they all have over 2/3 possess at least one vehicle, meaning they have access to listen to Bloomberg Radio on their commutes to work. Jim?
So after analyzing Bloomberg's current market in New York and Boston, what we wanted to do was conduct an analysis of news radio listenership as a whole in the United States. What we found is it's on the decline. About 33% of adults surveyed said they listened to news radio yesterday. And what you can see on the left is the incline of people who check online resources for news, which actually passed those who tune into the radio for their news in 2011. Also, what we see is the amount of adults moving towards online radio listening. The percentages continue to increase. You can see a couple dips in around 2005, 2004, but overall the trend is upward. It's increased about 27% from 2002 to 2012. And now Brian's going to talk to you about competition.
So looking at the competition, there are 3 general content areas in terms of programming. And these are the types of programs on the radio that would fit into each of those areas. And the center is where Bloomberg Radio competitors would fall. So here's the New York City radio market in terms of news, talk, and information format stations. If you get rid of the stations that focus on local information, sports, music, religious programming, and other things like news and health, these are the stations you're left with. Now, we still need to look at signal strength and if it reaches the metro area. And so 2 of these stations actually do not, and these are the New York City competitors you're looking at for Bloomberg Radio. Moving on to Boston, we do the same type of thing. And you notice there's still 2 stations up top, and those are financial news stations. And so Bloomberg Radio wants to keep an eye on those stations because they offer similar programming in terms of financial markets and stuff like that. But there's still some stuff they could do. So if we get rid of the signal, the people without signal, this is what we're left with. And then looking at the actual competition in different areas, this is what you are left with. Sirius XM does have 6 channels with competitors as well. Moving on.
So in terms of radio signal analysis, our goal was to get a better understanding of the signal strength and how that applies to our target market, which is the power elite. So if you look at the map, we see the red line shows that there's very good signal in the downtown area as well as the nearest suburbs. And as we move further, the signal gets weaker. So to make sense out of this, we decided to compare this to our target market concentration map. So if we look at this, we can see that where our market is highly concentrated, we get a really good signal. As we move, as our signal gets weaker, so does the concentration of our target market. following the same logic, we moved to New York and we observed the same pattern. So I'll pass it to Megan.
All right. For commuting time analysis, Arbitron gave us some basic statistics for Boston and New York commute times. Boston came in about 29 minutes and New York about 35 minutes. Now we wanted to focus on the power elite, so we went back to the demographics now and averaged the power elite, and it came out to about 80% commuted in their car alone to work. So we wanted to include that in our heat map. So we extended that to include the affluent areas of both Boston and New York, and that upped the commute time from the average that was given by Arbitron by 20 minutes for each market. This concludes that the affluent power elite that Bloomberg is targeting is actually in the car more than the average person. So in conclusion, what we've told you, we are focusing on the power elite. One thing to focus on is that there's a trend moving away from radio and towards online resources. We think that is a major thing that you should focus on. Also, we don't agree with Al when he says that Bloomberg has no competition. We think that they do, and that you should be aware of those competitors in New York and Boston. They have a strong radio signal that covers the target market, and the commute time for the power elite is greater than the average. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, chaps. I'm Hassan, this is Gur, Divikar, Diego, and Sandipan. We're going to tell you a little bit about what we think. So this is our table of contents. We're going to start with a brief programming analysis and end with the conclusion. All of our points are pretty clear and bold. To begin with, bad news for Bloomberg. Unfortunately, only 33% of people nowadays extract their news from radio, and that figure is declining unless you're in the digital industry. I don't know whether Bloomberg is or is not, that's not my business for the moment. However, we have what we think might be a solution. And this leads to why we've targeted a specific demographic. So, this map shows New York and Boston on a Monday afternoon, this week's Monday actually, live congestion in the commuter area. That's around 4:30 in the afternoon. All right, now the great thing about this is that it shows and justifies why we've selected commuters as the people we're trying to analyze. Now, over here we have the signal strength, which I'm not too concerned about, except to show that there's no reason why we should concentrate solely on downtown New York and downtown Boston. We need to excavate as much as we can out of Bloomberg's potential customers, which is why we've incorporated some national as well as local statistics in our presentation. And now we have Gur, who's going to tell you a little bit more about who we've selected.
So we selected settled in suburbia as our primary target consumer. As an example from Modern Family, similar to Gloria and Joy, we think that the white collar families in 40s and 50s, they're the perfect people that we could select. And they're heavy commuters. They listen to their radios, and when they commute, they actually listen to their news on the radios. As our secondary target, we've selected jet set urbanized. Similar to Eric Baldwin and Marilyn Shee from It's Complicated. These people are singles who are in their 50s and 60s. They're wealthy. Their income is higher than $150,000, and they describe themselves as risk takers. When they're in their peak years, when they make their money, they're not looking to save their money, they're also looking to invest it as well. And now Divakar will tell about where these people are located.
With who being said, I'm going to tell more about where they are from. So both our recommended groups are heavily concentrated in Massachusetts and also in New York. If you see the chart, our targeted customer audience are almost 400,000. And if you see out of the total population, 5% are settled in suburbia and 1% are jet set urbanites. And if you see the New York, our total consumers is little over 2 million, and out of the total population, 6% are settled in suburbia and 5% are from jet set urbanites. So which suggests that both these groups have a higher proportion. Now Diego will tell more about why we choose these groups.
All right, so basically we've told you that we've selected people settled in suburbia as well as jet set urbanizers because of their commuters. As you can see from the stat above, 94% of people settled in suburbia commute, 88% of them using their cars. Same goes for jet set urbanites, 74% commute, 30% use their cars. So what's important here? What's the question that Bloomberg needs to answer, which was something Mr. Myers asked last time? What do they do while they're commuting in their cars? What's important? So as you can see from the stat above, you can see the bar up top says that while they're driving, their primary device they use, 84% of them say they use AM, FM radio. This does not mean they use it 100% of the time. As you can see from this pie graph, if you can focus on the green part, 64% of the time that commuters spend in their car, they're listening to AM, FM radio. So I'm going to pass it over to Sandy Pan, who's going to explain more about the news radio market in Boston and New York.
So what does people do exactly when they are traveling in their car and tuned into their FM radio? That brings up the question like what's important to Bloomberg. And so basically the customers, what we are focusing on are not those who are interested in sports related news or music, but typically those who are interested in news talk information. So we did a research on Arbitron and this is what we found. So these are the list of competitors in Boston area and about 11.6% of the people are tuned into news talk information. And we have similar stats from New York, about 6.7%. So this tells us that Bloomberg should basically consider these roughly around this percentage of people and these particular competitors. So, and now I'll pass on to Hassan for the conclusion.
All right, chaps. So what I need to stress is that we did not choose settled in suburbia and jet set urbanites as our demographics. Our market analysis helped us deduce these two selections. We had nothing to do with it, other than the brains and stuff like that. But other than that, the important thing to remember is that we've told you who we are, we've told you who we're targeting, why we're targeting them, and we explained it to you by showing you that of the proportion of people who are willing to listen to Bloomberg in their cars, it's going to be whilst they're commuting, and we've provided statistics to justify our explanation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are Team 5 and we are here to present our analysis on the radio industry and highlight the position of Bloomberg Radio in New York and Boston metro area. According to us, we feel that Bloomberg Radio's target consumers need to have these characteristics. And based on our presentation last week on the mosaic profiles, we kind of feel that the Power Elite satisfy all these characteristics. Now moving forward, we'll check that whether Bloomberg Radio is targeting the right audience or not. We did a market analysis and pulled up the age profiles out over here. We can see over here that majority of the population in New York metro region have an age of above 45, which comprises about 40% of the population. Similarly, even in Boston metro area, you can see that the majority of the population have an age of more than 45. We even pulled up so Bloomberg Radio is actually doing in the age profile in the age profiles. In the income profile, you can see that the majority of population have an income of $100,000 in New York, and even in Boston area, we can see that majority of the population have about $100,000, which is approximately about 35% of the total population. So again, Bloomberg Radio is targeting the right in the right market right now. Now this is what is interesting for us. We kind of had a distribution of the mosaic profiles in this market, and in Boston Metro we can see that the Power Elite, which we think is a target consumer over here, is just 4%, but then the other profiles over here are much more prominent in this market. Similarly, even in New York, in the New York market, we can see that the Power Elite comprises just 9%, but then other mosaic profiles are more prominent in New York market as well. I now request Rhonda to present the programming analysis.
So we did a program analysis to determine the major competition that Bloomberg Radio is faced with, and we came up with several stations in both the New York and Boston markets. All of these stations are focused on business, news, and finance programming, but we're considering them to be more indirect competition just because they're not as exclusive with this type of information as Bloomberg Radio is. We found that actually several of these stations are in the top rankings for radio ratings in their markets. For example, WBZ was number 4 in Boston, WBUR is number 12, and we checked in the past 3 months, and unfortunately, Bloomberg hasn't been showing up in these rankings. We also found some other types of competition, which are other radio formats like music radio, which is the most popular type of format, and then other types of technology like CD players, MP3 players, internet, and cell phones. And now Rohit will talk about the signal analysis.
Thank you, Rhonda. So based on the signal analysis, we found out that the signal strength of Bloomberg is in fact very good and comparable to other competitors in both Boston and New York. But the coverage area of Bloomberg radio is not as wide as some of the competitors such as WBZ AM or WRK AM, but in fact better than some other competitors such as WB and W in Boston. And it's the same case in New York as well. Its signal is not as wide as WINS AM or WABC AM, but in fact better than WOR AM. So I think I would suggest Bloomberg to focus on coverage area to increase its customer base. So now Pravina will continue with further analysis.
Thank you, Rohit. To conduct a listenership analysis, we took the data from the Arbitron, like how much people listen to News Talk and how much age are they. Like a majority of the people are like above age group of 45, like approximately 69% of them. And then we conducted, in order to narrow down to cities, we looked at overall radio market rankings, and number 1 was New York and number 10 is Boston. And the number 4 is San Francisco, whom the Bloomberg is targeting next. Usually, basically, cities with high population density are in these rankings. So it's wise for Bloomberg to stick to these cities which has a high population density. And then we conducted a listenership analysis by location. So it's like you could see that adults and people with high income, like 75,000 above, they have the same behavior. That is, they listen in car, the radio the most. And the average listening time is like 2 hours and 36 minutes. Next, Yash will be presenting the commuting time analysis.
Right. We believe get the customers who basically are commuting. So in Boston area, we found that there are 3.28 million customers daily commuting. From that, 70% drive alone, which is 2.26 million. And the preferred listening time is between 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. And the average commuting time is approximately 29 minutes, which is a lot according to us. New York Metro, 13.5 million people commute daily. From that, 50% drive alone, which is 6.64 million. We find it very interesting since we think it increases the probability of listening to radio if you're driving alone. Average commute time is somewhere around 34 minutes, which is a lot too. So conclusion, New York and Boston, high population and potential markets. There are several competitors with better signal coverage. Bloomberg should look at it, I think. Most of the people who listen to news talk radio are listeners whose average age is more than 45 years old, and majority of people who listen to radios are commuters. Thank you.
Okay, so hi everyone, we're team 3, and I'm Karen. This is my team, John, Megan, Ander, and Siobhan. So we're here today to talk about Bloomberg Radio's current situation in Boston and New York markets. And here's our agenda. To keep things simple, we decided to keep the most important things from our research and analysis. So John will first introduce our market attributes, and then listener attributes, advertising, commuting, and lastly, the conclusions.
So while it may seem pretty obvious, the number of listeners a radio station has is a pretty important metric for how successful that radio station is. So therefore, bigger cities with larger radio listenership populations, they have the greatest potential to be successful. And as you can see from this slide, Boston and New York are in the top 10 in both the combined statistical analysis, combined statistical area, which is a population measure, and also radio listenership.
So nationwide, we say that radio listeners who average above the age of 35 make about 69% of the radio industry listenership. That's great, but it doesn't really tell you too much about business, right? Well, what that actually means is that 69% make about $12 billion of the advertising revenue for the radio industry. That's a really big amount. So what we're saying is we should probably focus in on that target age group. Overlapping with that is the Power Elite. The Power Elite has a similar age trend. Additionally, what's really important about the Power Elite besides this age is the disposable income. What does disposable income mean? It means they have extra money they can spend on goods and services, which is what advertisers are trying to get at, right? So we're saying that we should focus on the Power Elite households who tend to average above the age of 35. If you look at Boston and New York, both cities have at least 5% of their population within the Power Elite household. Also, both cities average over 40% of their population above the age of 35. It's a pretty good stat for what we think are two critical driving factors for the radio industry.
But what does that mean besides the age and societal rank? What that means is advertising. So good news, economy is increasing, and so as the economy is increasing, there's a forecast that advertising expenditures are also going to increase in the radio industry market as a whole. Bad news, we don't know that they're definitely going to go to traditional media markets. As a matter of fact, it's forecasted that this increased advertising revenue is going to go more towards the internet and online. That's good for us because we think that Bloomberg can capitalize on this and start using this towards their advantage to move into the online industry, such as iHeartRadio. There's a little bit more bad news, that even though as advertising is increasing, the listenership and the demand for radio is decreasing, which is another reason why we think Bloomberg should really capitalize on advertising in this age group to go into online marketing. So overall, our message here is that as the radio demand may decrease, strategic advertising will help sustain the growth of the radio industry.
So, in terms of commuting as a factor of success for the radio industry, IBIS World considered total vehicle miles as one of the key economic drivers of the radio broadcasting industry. However, we consider that the time spent in the car is more important than the miles driven. And this is because you can capture the exposure of the driver to the radio programming and the advertising. In other words, we think that a long-distance commute in a short time with little traffic is not as interesting for the advertisers as a shorter commute that could have a longer time due to traffic. Now Siobhan will present the conclusions.
All right, so based on our research, we were able to find some high-level insights on key factors driving success in the radio industry. First, bigger cities means more listeners, and that means more potential for new listeners in the market. Next, advertising revenue is key to the business of radio, and the age of the population is very influential here because it dictates both disposable income and buying power. And furthermore, strategic advertising will be essential in combating any downward trends in radio listening. And lastly, if distance traveled is a key economic driver, then commuting time will be equally important, if not more important, in driving advertising revenue and therefore success in the radio industry.